Maria Santos walked through the dusty streets of Kandahar, wearing a simple headscarf and modest clothing that made her blend into the crowd of Afghan women going about their daily business. At 28, she stood barely 5 feet tall with dark hair and quiet brown eyes that most people barely noticed. The local Taliban fighters who controlled this section of the city saw her as just another insignificant woman, perhaps a teacher or nurse working at one of the aid organizations that operated in the region. They had no idea they were looking at one of the most lethal special operations soldiers in the Philippine military. Maria had grown up in a small fishing village on the island of Mindanao, where her father mended nets and her mother sold fish at the local market. The youngest of 6 children, she learned early that being small and overlooked could be an advantage. While her older brothers received attention for their size and strength, Maria quietly excelled at everything she touched. She could climb trees faster than boys twice her size, swim in rough seas that intimidated grown men, and had an uncanny ability to move through dense jungle without making a sound. When she turned 18, Maria shocked her family by announcing she wanted to join the armed forces of the Philippines. Her father laughed, thinking it was a phase. Her mother worried about the dangers. Her brothers teased her about being too small and weak for military life. The local recruitment officer in their provincial town took one look at her slight frame and suggested she consider becoming a military nurse instead. Maria smiled politely and thanked him for the suggestion. Then, she traveled 3 hours to the regional recruitment center in Davao City, where she passed every physical and mental test they could throw at her. Her scores were so exceptional that a special forces recruiter pulled her aside after the standard evaluation. "Have you ever considered special operations?" the grizzled sergeant asked, studying her test results with raised eyebrows. Maria had never even heard the term before, but she was interested in any opportunity that would challenge her abilities to their fullest extent. The sergeant explained that Special Operations Forces undertook the most dangerous and sensitive missions the military had to offer. They required soldiers who could think independently, adapt to any situation, and maintain their composure under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. "Most people who apply don't make it through selection," he warned her. "The dropout rate is over 90%. Are you sure you want to try?" Maria nodded without hesitation. Something deep inside her had always known she was meant for more than the quiet life her village offered. The Special Forces selection course nearly broke her. For 6 months, she endured physical trials that pushed her body to its absolute limits. She carried equipment weighing nearly as much as she did across mountains and through swamps. She went days without sleep while navigating complex tactical scenarios. She learned to shoot with deadly accuracy, using weapons ranging from sniper rifles to improvised explosives. But the psychological challenges proved even more demanding than the physical ones. The instructors constantly tested her mental resilience, subjecting candidates to intense stress, uncertainty, and ethical dilemmas designed to reveal character flaws that could prove fatal in real operations. Many of the strongest and most confident candidates cracked under this pressure, unable to maintain their judgment when exhaustion and fear clouded their thinking. Maria not only survived the course, but excelled in ways that surprised even the veteran instructors. Her small size, which many people saw as a weakness, became one of her greatest assets. She could hide in spaces where larger soldiers couldn't fit, move silently through areas where others would be detected, and blend into civilian populations in ways that her more imposing colleagues never could. More importantly, she demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to remain calm and analytical under pressure. While other candidates panicked when faced with impossible scenarios, Maria would quietly assess the situation, identify creative solutions that others missed, and execute her plans with precision and confidence that impressed everyone who witnessed her work. After graduation, Maria spent 3 years conducting counterterrorism operations in the southern Philippines, where various insurgent groups had been fighting the government for decades. She participated in dozens of missions that officially never happened, tracking down terrorist leaders, gathering intelligence, and disrupting operations that threatened civilian populations across the region. Her commanders quickly learned that Maria could accomplish things that entire platoons of conventional soldiers couldn't manage. She could infiltrate enemy camps without being detected, gather crucial information about terrorist plans, and eliminate high-value targets without alerting nearby fighters to her presence. Her success rate was extraordinary, and her ability to blend into local populations made her invaluable for operations requiring cultural sensitivity and subtlety. But Maria's reputation within the Special Forces community extended far beyond her operational successes. She possessed an analytical mind that could process complex tactical situations with remarkable speed and accuracy. During mission planning sessions, she often identified vulnerabilities and opportunities that more experienced officers had overlooked. Her insights frequently led to mission modifications that significantly improved their chances of success, while reducing risks to both military personnel and civilians. When the Philippine government received a request from NATO forces for experienced special operations personnel to assist with stabilization efforts in Afghanistan, Maria's name topped the list of recommended candidates. The assignment would involve working with international forces to disrupt Taliban operations, gather intelligence on insurgent networks, and help train local security forces to defend their communities against terrorist attacks. Maria accepted the assignment immediately, despite knowing that Afghanistan represented one of the most challenging operational environments in the world. The Taliban controlled large areas of the country. Improvised explosive devices killed or maimed coalition forces almost daily, and the complex tribal dynamics made it difficult to distinguish between allies and enemies. She arrived at Bagram Airfield on a hot July morning, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing the standard uniform that marked her as just another soldier among the thousands of international troops stationed throughout Afghanistan. The American and European Special Forces personnel she was assigned to work with greeted her politely, but with obvious skepticism. Most had never worked with Philippine military personnel before, and many questioned whether someone from a relatively small military could contribute meaningfully to their sophisticated operations. Captain James Mitchell, the American officer who led the special operations team, tried to hide his disappointment when he first met Maria. He had requested additional personnel for a complex mission targeting a Taliban network operating in Kandahar province, and he had expected someone who looked more like the stereotypical special forces operator. Maria's quiet demeanor and diminutive stature made him worry that she might become a liability rather than an asset during high-stress combat situations. "Welcome to Afghanistan," he said, shaking her hand and noting her firm grip. "I hope you're ready for some interesting work." Maria smiled and nodded. "I'm ready for whatever you need, sir." During her first week at the forward operating base, Maria observed the American team's procedures and familiarized herself with their equipment and protocols. She participated in training exercises, contributed to intelligence briefings, and gradually earned the respect of her colleagues through her professionalism and competence. However, she could sense that many of them still saw her as an inexperienced outsider who would need protection rather than someone capable of leading dangerous operations. The Taliban network they were targeting had been responsible for multiple attacks against coalition forces and Afghan civilians over the previous 6 months. Led by a commander named Abdul Rahman, the group operated from a network of safe houses scattered throughout Kandahar's densely populated neighborhoods. They manufactured improvised explosive devices, recruited new fighters, and coordinated attacks against government installations and international aid organizations working in the region. Previous attempts to locate and capture Rahman had failed because he constantly moved between different locations and maintained strict operational security that made it nearly impossible to track his movements. The network used an elaborate system of coded communications, trusted couriers, and false identities that had frustrated coalition intelligence efforts for months. Captain Mitchell's team had been tasked with developing a new approach to penetrate Rahman's organization and gather the intelligence needed to disrupt their operations permanently. Traditional surveillance methods had proven ineffective because Rahman's fighters were too familiar with coalition tactics and could easily spot American or European soldiers conducting reconnaissance in the area. "We need someone who can get close without raising suspicions," Mitchell explained during a mission planning session. "Someone who can move through the city like a local and gather information without anyone realizing they're being watched." Maria studied the intelligence files and proposed a radically different approach. Instead of trying to penetrate Rahman's inner circle through technical surveillance or informants, she suggested infiltrating the broader community where the terrorists operated. By posing as a foreign aid worker or teacher, she could establish a presence in the neighborhood, build relationships with local residents, and gradually gather information about the network's activities and locations. "It's too dangerous," Mitchell objected. "If they discover who you really are, you'll be completely on your own. We won't be able to extract you or provide backup without exposing the entire operation." Maria remained calm as she explained her reasoning. "That's exactly why it might work. They won't expect someone like me to be conducting surveillance. Afghan women move through these neighborhoods every day without anyone paying attention to them. I can gather intelligence while appearing to be just another civilian going about her daily business." The plan required Maria to live undercover in Kandahar for several weeks, maintaining her false identity while slowly mapping the terrorist network's operations. She would need to establish credible reasons for being in different parts of the city, develop relationships with local residents who might inadvertently provide useful information, and identify patterns in the terrorist activities that could reveal their locations and plans. After extensive debate, Mitchell's superiors approved the operation despite their reservations about the risks involved. Maria spent 2 weeks preparing for her role, studying Afghan customs and language, rehearsing her cover story, and memorizing detailed maps of Kandahar's complex street layout. She would carry minimal equipment to avoid detection, relying primarily on her training and instincts to keep her safe while she gathered the intelligence they needed. The morning she entered Kandahar, wearing civilian clothes and carrying forged identification documents, Maria felt the familiar combination of excitement and focus that always accompanied dangerous missions. She knew that her success or failure would determine whether Rahman's network continued terrorizing the region or whether coalition forces finally had the information they needed to eliminate this threat permanently. Walking through the crowded bazaar, where vendors sold everything from fresh fruit to motorcycle parts, Maria began the patient work of becoming invisible. She purchased a few items to establish her presence in the area, spoke briefly with shopkeepers in her carefully practiced Dari, and observed the subtle patterns of daily life that would help her blend seamlessly into the community. Over the following days, Maria gradually expanded her area of operations, visiting different neighborhoods while maintaining her cover as someone helping with educational programs for local children. She rented a small room in a compound owned by a widow who needed extra income, establishing a base of operations that gave her legitimate reasons for being in the area at all hours. The work required incredible patience and attention to detail. Maria had to remember every conversation, note every unusual pattern of activity, and gradually pieced together the complex web of relationships that connected Rahman's network to the broader community. She observed which houses received visitors at unusual hours, which shops served as informal meeting places, and which residents seemed to have unexplained sources of income. Most importantly, she had to do all of this while maintaining her cover identity and avoiding any behavior that might arouse suspicion. She participated in community activities, helped local women with various tasks, and gradually built the relationships that would allow her to gather information without anyone realizing they were being questioned. 3 weeks into the operation, Maria had identified several properties that served as safe houses for Rahman's network and mapped the routes they used to move weapons and supplies throughout the city. She had also learned that Rahman himself was planning to attend a meeting at one of these locations within the next few days to coordinate a major attack against a government installation. But as she prepared to transmit this critical information to Mitchell's team, Maria realized that someone had been watching her. Small details that might have escaped notice from less experienced operatives told her that her movements were being tracked and her activities were under scrutiny. Someone within Rahman's organization had become suspicious of the new woman in the neighborhood, and they were conducting their own surveillance to determine whether she posed a threat to their operations. Maria knew that she was approaching the most dangerous phase of her mission. If Rahman's fighters discovered her true identity, they would not hesitate to capture and kill her as an example to anyone else who might consider working with coalition forces. But the intelligence she had gathered was too valuable to abandon, and the opportunity to capture Rahman might not come again for months. She decided to maintain her cover for a few more days while preparing for the possibility that she might need to fight her way out of the city if her identity was discovered. The weapons and equipment she had hidden in her room would give her some capability to defend herself, but she would be vastly outnumbered if Rahman's entire network turned against her. As Maria walked through the market that evening, purchasing vegetables for the simple meal she would prepare in a rented room, she noticed that two men were following her at a distance. They tried to appear casual, stopping occasionally to examine merchandise at various stalls, but their attention remained focused on her movements throughout her shopping trip. When she turned down the narrow alley that led to her compound, Maria realized that the men were no longer content to simply observe her from a distance. Their pace had quickened, and she could hear additional footsteps approaching from behind. Rahman's network had apparently decided that she represented enough of a threat to warrant direct action, and they were moving to capture her before she could escape or communicate with her handlers. Maria's training kicked in as she assessed her tactical situation. She was outnumbered, carrying minimal weapons, and operating in an environment where the enemy had every advantage. Any mistake would likely result in her capture or death, and failure would mean that Rahman's network would continue operating while also alerting them to coalition surveillance capabilities they had been unaware of previously. But Maria had faced overwhelming odds before, and she had always found ways to turn apparent disadvantages into opportunities for success. As the footsteps behind her grew closer and she approached the entrance to her compound, she began implementing a plan that would either secure her escape or eliminate enough of Rahman's fighters to disrupt their operations, even if she didn't survive the encounter. The next few minutes would determine whether months of patient intelligence work would culminate in a major victory against terrorism, or whether one of the Philippines' most capable special forces operators would disappear forever in the dusty streets of an Afghan city where no one knew her real name or the sacrifices she had made in service of peace and security. Maria reached into her bag as she approached her door, her fingers closing around the compact pistol she had kept hidden throughout her weeks undercover. Behind her, she could hear the men who had been following her beginning to close the distance, their footsteps no longer attempting to maintain the pretense of casual movement through the neighborhood. The moment of truth was approaching, and everything she had trained for throughout her military career would be tested in the next few critical seconds. Maria inserted her key into the lock while listening carefully to the approaching footsteps. For men, moving with the controlled urgency of fighters who believed they had cornered easy prey. Their mistake was assuming that a small woman carrying groceries would be helpless once they revealed their intentions. They had no idea that every movement Maria made was calculated, every gesture designed to maintain the illusion of normalcy while she prepared for the violence that was about to unfold. As she pushed open the door to her compound, Maria dropped her bag of vegetables and spun around with fluid precision that would have impressed her special forces instructors back in the Philippines. The compact Glock pistol appeared in her hands as if by magic, the weapon rising to firing position while her body moved into a stable shooting stance that maximized accuracy while minimizing her profile as a target. The lead fighter, a bearded man in his 30s carrying an AK, 47, had just enough time to register surprise before Maria's first shot struck him center mass. The subsonic ammunition she was using kept the sound to a manageable level, but the impact drove him backward into his companions, disrupting their formation and buying her precious seconds to engage the remaining threats. Maria's second shot took down the fighter to the left, who had been reaching for his own weapon when her bullet found its mark. The remaining two men scrambled for cover behind a parked motorcycle, shouting warnings in Pashto while trying to coordinate their response to this unexpected resistance from their supposedly helpless target. Instead of retreating into her compound, where she might become trapped, Maria moved laterally along the wall, using the shadows and architectural features of the narrow alley to mask her position while maintaining angles of fire on her attackers. The tactic surprised the fighters, who expected her to either flee or take cover rather than pressing the attack against superior numbers. The third fighter attempted to outflank her position, moving quickly around the motorcycle while his companion provided covering fire with an ancient Soviet-era pistol. Maria waited until he committed to his movement before emerging from cover long enough to place a precise shot that ended his participation in the fight. Her ammunition was limited, and every round needed to count if she hoped to survive this encounter. The remaining fighter, realizing that his companions were dead or dying, began calling for backup while continuing to fire in Maria's general direction. His shots were poorly aimed, driven more by panic than tactical thinking, but Maria knew that more Taliban fighters would arrive soon if she allowed this situation to escalate into a prolonged gun battle. She retrieved a flashbang grenade from the equipment cache hidden in her room, pulled the pin, and rolled it toward her last attacker's position. The explosion that followed disoriented the fighter long enough for Maria to close the distance and neutralize the final threat with a shot that ensured he would not be calling for reinforcements. The entire engagement had lasted less than 90 seconds, but Maria knew that the sound of gunfire would attract attention from both Taliban sympathizers and curious civilians. She had perhaps 5 minutes before the area became too dangerous to remain in, and she needed to use that time to gather her essential equipment and evacuate to an extraction point where Mitchell's team could retrieve her safely. Moving with practiced efficiency, Maria collected her communications equipment, weapon cache, and the detailed notes she had compiled about Rahman's network over the past 3 weeks. The intelligence she had gathered was too valuable to abandon, and her observations about the terrorist organization's structure and operations could save countless lives if properly utilized by coalition forces. As she prepared to leave the compound, Maria heard vehicles approaching from multiple directions. The Taliban response was faster and more organized than she had expected, suggesting that Rahman's network maintained better situational awareness and reaction capabilities than previous intelligence estimates had indicated. The fighters she had killed were apparently part of a larger security element tasked with protecting the organization's operations in this neighborhood. Maria activated her emergency beacon, transmitting a coded signal that would alert Mitchell's team to her situation while providing her precise location for potential rescue operations. However, she knew that extraction would be complicated by the Taliban presence now flooding the area, and she might need to evade capture for several hours before friendly forces could reach her safely. Instead of attempting to fight her way through the growing enemy presence, Maria decided to exploit her greatest advantage, the ability to blend into the local population. She quickly changed into different clothing that would help her appear to be a frightened civilian caught in the crossfire, concealed her weapons in a way that allowed quick access while maintaining her disguise, and prepared to disappear into the chaos that was beginning to engulf the neighborhood. The sound of additional gunfire erupted from nearby streets as Taliban fighters began searching compound by compound for the person responsible for killing their comrades. Maria could hear them kicking in doors, shouting questions at terrified residents, and growing increasingly frustrated as their search failed to locate their target. Their heavy-handed tactics were alienating the very civilians whose cooperation they needed to find her, creating opportunities that a skilled operator could exploit. Maria slipped out of her compound through a back entrance she had identified during her reconnaissance of the area. The narrow passage connected to a series of interconnected courtyards that would allow her to move through the neighborhood without using the main streets where Taliban fighters were concentrating their search efforts. Her weeks of patient observation were now paying dividends as she navigated terrain she knew better than many of her pursuers. Moving carefully through the maze of buildings and alleyways, Maria made her way toward a prearranged safe house located several blocks away. The location was known only to her and Mitchell's team, providing a secure place where she could wait for extraction while monitoring Taliban movements in the area. The building was owned by an Afghan police officer who secretly cooperated with coalition forces, though he maintained the appearance of neutrality to protect his family from retaliation. As she approached the safe house, Maria realized that her situation was more complicated than simple evasion and extraction. The Taliban fighters searching for her were being directed by someone who understood coalition tactics and operational procedures. Their search pattern was too systematic, their reaction too rapid, and their coordination too effective for a typical terrorist cell operating without sophisticated intelligence capabilities. Someone within Rahman's network had anticipated the possibility of coalition surveillance operations and prepared countermeasures designed to identify and eliminate foreign operatives working in the area. The speed and organization of their response suggested that they had been planning for this type of scenario, possibly for weeks or months before Maria's arrival in Kandahar. This realization forced Maria to reconsider her assessment of Rahman's organization. Instead of a simple terrorist cell focused primarily on local attacks, she was dealing with a sophisticated network that had adapted to coalition tactics and developed capabilities that posed threats far beyond their immediate area of operations. The intelligence she had gathered about their structure and activities was even more valuable than she had initially understood. Maria reached the safe house and used the predetermined signal to identify herself to the Afghan police officer who maintained the location. He quickly led her inside, securing the entrance while she established communications with Mitchell's team. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly, and both she and her American colleagues needed current information to plan their next moves effectively. Angel 1 to base, she transmitted using her operational call sign. Package secured for Tangos neutralized. Primary target location confirmed. Request immediate extraction. Heavy enemy presence throughout the area. Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece with barely controlled concern. Angel 1, we have multiple Taliban units moving toward your general area. Extraction will be complicated. Can you maintain position until we can clear a route? Negative, Maria replied while observing Taliban fighters moving through the street outside the safe house. They're conducting systematic searches. This location will be compromised within the hour. I need to keep moving. The Taliban search teams were indeed getting closer. Maria could hear them questioning residents in nearby buildings, their voices growing louder and more aggressive as they failed to locate their target. Some were offering rewards for information about the foreign woman who had killed their comrades, while others were threatening violence against anyone who might be harboring enemies of their organization. Maria studied her tactical options while maintaining communication with Mitchell's team. The Taliban controlled most of the direct routes toward coalition-controlled areas, making conventional extraction nearly impossible without a significant military operation that would alert Rahman's network to the full extent of coalition intelligence gathering in the region. Such an operation would also endanger civilian lives and potentially destabilize the fragile security situation throughout Kandahar province. Base, I'm going to attempt indigenous extraction, Maria transmitted. Continue mission planning for target package. Do not compromise operational security for personnel recovery. She was telling Mitchell's team to prioritize the mission objective over her personal safety. The intelligence she had gathered about Rahman's network was more important than any individual operator, and she was willing to accept increased personal risk to ensure that information reached coalition planners who could use it to prevent future terrorist attacks. Mitchell understood the implication of her message, but he was not prepared to abandon one of the most capable operators he had ever worked with. Angel 1, maintain position. We're developing extraction options that don't compromise the mission. Maria appreciated his concern, but she knew that waiting for rescue would likely result in her capture and the loss of all the intelligence she had worked so hard to collect. Instead of remaining in the safe house where Taliban fighters would eventually find her, she decided to take the initiative and turn her pursuit into an opportunity to gather additional information about Rahman's organization. The Taliban fighters searching for her were communicating using radios and cell phones, providing real-time updates about their progress and receiving instructions from commanders coordinating the operation. If Maria could intercept some of these communications, she might learn details about Rahman's location, operational plans, and security procedures that would be invaluable for future coalition operations against the network. She reconfigured her radio equipment to monitor Taliban communications frequencies while preparing to move through the neighborhood in a way that would allow her to observe their search operations without being detected. The information she could gather during the next few hours might be worth the additional risk, especially if it led to Rahman's capture or elimination. Moving carefully from building to building, Maria began tracking the Taliban's search teams while monitoring their radio traffic. The communication she intercepted revealed significant details about the network structure, including the identities of several key leaders and the locations of additional safe houses that had not been identified through previous intelligence collection efforts. More importantly, she learned that Rahman himself was coordinating the search operation from a command post located less than a mile from her current position. The terrorist leader had apparently decided that the threat posed by coalition surveillance required his personal attention, creating an unexpected opportunity for Maria to accomplish the mission's primary objective despite the complications created by her exposure. Rahman's location was heavily defended, with multiple security layers and escape routes that would make a conventional assault extremely difficult. However, Maria's current situation provided unique advantages that a traditional military operation would lack. The Taliban fighters were focused on finding and capturing her, not protecting their leadership from a single operator who might attempt to infiltrate their command post. If she could reach Rahman's location without being detected, Maria might be able to eliminate the terrorist leader and gather intelligence about his network's broader operations throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan. Such a success would justify all the risks she had taken and provide coalition forces with a decisive victory against one of the region's most dangerous terrorist organizations. The plan required Maria to move through Taliban-controlled territory while avoiding numerous security checkpoints and search teams actively hunting for her. She would need to exploit every aspect of her training while maintaining the element of surprise that was her only significant advantage against overwhelming enemy numbers. As darkness began to fall over Kandahar, Maria prepared for what might be the most dangerous mission of her career. She checked her equipment one final time, confirmed her route to Rahman's command post, and transmitted her intentions to Mitchell's team so they could provide whatever support was possible given the tactical constraints they faced. Base, Angel 1 moving to secondary objective. If contact is lost, proceed with planned operations based on intelligence package already transmitted. Mitchell's response reflected both admiration and concern for the soldier he had come to respect during their brief time working together. Angel 1, confirm your intentions. Are you attempting direct action against primary target? Affirmative, Maria replied. Opportunity target, maximum tactical advantage. Request fire support if available during execution window. She was telling Mitchell that she intended to attempt Rahman's assassination during the confusion created by the ongoing search operation. If she could eliminate the terrorist leader while his fighters were scattered throughout the neighborhood looking for her, the resulting chaos might allow her to escape while dealing a devastating blow to the network's operational capabilities. The next few hours would determine whether Maria's bold gambit succeeded in eliminating one of Afghanistan's most wanted terrorists or whether she became another casualty in the long struggle between coalition forces and the insurgent networks that had plagued the region for decades. Either way, she was determined to make her sacrifice count for something meaningful in the broader fight for peace and security. Maria disappeared into the darkening streets of Kandahar, moving like a ghost through territory controlled by enemies who had no idea that their most dangerous threat was a small woman from the Philippines who refused to be underestimated by anyone. Maria moved through the darkened streets of Kandahar like a shadow, every step calculated to avoid the Taliban patrols that had flooded the neighborhood in their search for her. The radio chatter she monitored revealed growing frustration among Rahman's fighters as their systematic sweep failed to locate the mysterious woman who had killed 4 of their comrades with surgical precision. 3 blocks from Rahman's command post, Maria paused in the doorway of an abandoned shop to observe a Taliban checkpoint that blocked her most direct approach route. 6 fighters armed with assault rifles were stopping every person who passed through the area, conducting searches and demanding identification from anyone who appeared suspicious. Their position covered the main street that led to the compound where Rahman was coordinating the search operation. Instead of attempting to bypass the checkpoint through side streets that might contain additional security measures, Maria decided to exploit the Taliban fighters' assumptions about threats and capabilities. She removed her headscarf and outer garments, revealing the simple dress underneath that made her appear to be a local woman caught outside after dark. She concealed her weapons in a cloth bundle that resembled the packages many Afghan women carried while going about their daily business. Walking toward the checkpoint with the hesitant pace of someone nervous about encountering armed men, Maria projected the image of a frightened civilian hoping to reach safety before the security situation deteriorated further. The Taliban fighters barely glanced at her as she approached, their attention focused on potential male threats rather than what appeared to be just another worried woman trying to get home. "Where are you going?" one of the fighters asked in Pashto as Maria reached the checkpoint. "To my sister's house," she replied in the dialect she had practiced during her mission preparation. "I was visiting friends when the shooting started. I just want to get somewhere safe." The fighter looked her up and down with the dismissive attitude typical of Taliban treatment toward women. Her small stature and modest appearance reinforced his assumption that she posed no threat to their operations. He waved her through without conducting the detailed search that he would have performed on any male suspect. Maria thanked him politely and continued down the street toward Rahman's compound, her heart rate remaining steady despite the enormous risk she had just taken. The checkpoint encounter had confirmed her assessment that the Taliban fighters were underestimating threats from women, a blind spot that she could exploit throughout her infiltration attempt. 200 meters from her target, Maria encountered the first of several security perimeters that Rahman had established around his command post. Fighters positioned on rooftops and in doorways maintained overlapping fields of fire that would make conventional assault extremely difficult for even a large military unit. However, their positioning assumed attacks would come from predictable directions using standard tactics. Maria studied the security layout while concealed in the shadows of a ruined building. The Taliban fighters were focused on threats approaching from the main roads and obvious infiltration routes, but they had not adequately covered the complex network of interconnected rooftops and courtyards that characterized this section of Kandahar. Someone with her climbing abilities and knowledge of urban warfare could potentially reach the command post without being detected by the outer security perimeter. She began her approach using skills learned during childhood adventures in the Philippine mountains combined with advanced techniques mastered during Special Forces training. Moving from building to building across rooftops and through narrow passages between structures, Maria gradually closed the distance to Rahman's location while remaining invisible to the fighters positioned at ground level. The infiltration required perfect timing and absolute silence. Each movement had to be coordinated with the ambient noise of the neighborhood to mask any sounds that might alert the security teams. Maria waited for trucks passing in nearby streets, conversations between civilians, and even the call to evening prayers from a distant mosque to provide acoustic cover for her movements across vulnerable terrain. 40 minutes after leaving the checkpoint, Maria reached a position where she could observe Rahman's command post directly. The terrorist leader had established his headquarters in a two-story compound that provided good visibility of the surrounding neighborhood, while offering multiple escape routes if coalition forces attempted to assault the location. Guards were posted at every entrance, and sentries on the roof maintained constant surveillance of the approaches. Through a window on the second floor, Maria could see Rahman himself standing over a map table while receiving reports from subordinates about the search operation. The terrorist leader was a tall, imposing man with a carefully groomed beard and the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Intelligence files indicated that he was personally responsible for planning attacks that had killed dozens of coalition soldiers and hundreds of Afghan civilians over the past 2 years. Maria studied the internal layout of the compound while listening to radio communications that revealed details about Rahman's security arrangements and operational plans. The information she was gathering would be invaluable for future coalition operations, even if she was unable to complete her primary mission objective. However, she was determined to eliminate Rahman if any opportunity presented itself during the next few hours. The terrorist leader's routine provided the opening she needed. Every 30 minutes, Rahman moved to a different room in the compound to receive updates from various operational cells scattered throughout Kandahar province. His next scheduled communication would take place in a ground-floor office that offered Maria potential access through a window that was partially concealed from the rooftop sentries. She began planning her approach route while monitoring Taliban radio traffic for any indication that her presence in the area had been detected. The search teams were still focused on locations several blocks away, giving her a window of opportunity that might not remain open for much longer. Once Rahman's fighters realized that their target was no longer in the area they were searching, they would expand their perimeter and potentially discover the signs of her infiltration. Maria waited until Rahman entered the ground-floor office for his scheduled communication before beginning her final approach. Moving with the fluid grace that had made her legendary among Philippine Special Forces instructors, she descended from the rooftop position and crossed the compound's courtyard without being detected by the guards posted at various positions around the perimeter. The window she had identified provided access to Rahman's office, but approaching it required crossing an open area where she would be visible to anyone who happened to look in her direction. Maria timed her movement to coincide with the distraction created when one of the rooftop sentries called down to ask his colleagues about movement he had spotted in a distant street. She reached the window just as Rahman began speaking with someone on a satellite phone about coordinating additional attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The conversation provided crucial intelligence about planned terrorist operations while confirming that Rahman was indeed the high-value target that coalition forces had been seeking for months. Maria positioned herself outside the window with her compact pistol ready for immediate use. The range was less than 3 meters, well within the accuracy limits of her weapon and training. She would have one opportunity to eliminate Rahman before his security team reacted to the gunfire, and she needed to be prepared for immediate escape or sustained combat, depending on how the situation developed. Rahman stood with his back to the window while continuing his phone conversation, discussing timeline and resource requirements for attacks planned against government installations in Kabul and other major cities. The information he was revealing would allow coalition forces to prevent multiple terrorist operations if Maria could survive long enough to report the details to Mitchell's team. She raised her weapon and aimed carefully at the center of Rahman's torso, knowing that she needed to ensure immediate incapacitation to prevent him from calling for help or destroying sensitive documents that might be visible on his desk. The shot needed to be perfect because she would not get a second opportunity if the first attempt failed to achieve the desired result. Maria's finger began to apply pressure to the trigger when Rahman suddenly turned toward the window as if sensing danger. For a split second, their eyes met through the glass, and she saw recognition flash across his face as he realized that his hunter had become the hunted. His mouth opened to shout a warning to his guards, but Maria's shot arrived before any sound could emerge. The subsonic bullet struck Ramon in the chest with a devastating precision that had made her one of the Philippine military's most feared special operations soldiers. The terrorist leader collapsed immediately, his satellite phone clattering across the floor while documents scattered from the desk where he had been planning future attacks against innocent civilians. Maria was already moving before Ramon's body hit the ground, knowing that she had perhaps 60 seconds before his security team responded to the sound of gunfire and began flooding the area with overwhelming numbers of hostile fighters. She grabbed the documents from Ramon's desk and the satellite phone that might contain valuable intelligence about other terrorist networks before beginning her escape from the compound. The guards posted throughout the area reacted quickly to the gunshot, but their response was hampered by confusion about the source and nature of the threat they faced. Most expected an assault from outside the perimeter rather than an attack that had originated from within their supposedly secure command post. This confusion bought Maria precious time to reach her planned escape route before organized pursuit could begin. She moved through the compound's courtyard while guards were still trying to determine what had happened in Ramon's office. The sound of shouting and running footsteps filled the air as Taliban fighters began converging on the building, but Maria was already climbing toward the rooftop position she had identified during her earlier reconnaissance of the area. Reaching the roof, she could see Taliban vehicles racing through the streets below, while fighters on foot began establishing a new perimeter around the compound. Radio communications revealed that Ramon's death had been confirmed and that his lieutenants were implementing emergency procedures designed to prevent the loss of additional leadership personnel during potential follow-up operations. Maria activated her emergency beacon while beginning to move across the interconnected rooftops that would allow her to reach an extraction point outside the immediate area of Taliban control. The intelligence she had gathered about Ramon's network and planned operations was too valuable to risk losing, and she needed to ensure that information reached coalition forces before the terrorist organization could implement their contingency plans. Base Angel 1, she transmitted while moving carefully across a narrow gap between buildings. Primary target eliminated. Intelligence package secured. Proceeding to extraction point Alpha. Mitchell's response reflected amazement and relief that she had accomplished what many people would have considered impossible. Angel 1, confirm primary target elimination. Are you secure for extraction? Affirmative on target elimination, Maria replied, while observing Taliban search teams spreading throughout the neighborhood below. Negative on security. Heavy enemy presence, but I have clear route to extraction point. Request immediate pickup upon arrival. She continued moving through the maze of rooftops while Taliban fighters flooded the streets in their search for Ramon's assassin. The confusion created by their leader's death was working in Maria's favor, as different groups of fighters received conflicting orders and began interfering with each other's search efforts rather than coordinating their response effectively. 20 minutes later, Maria reached the predetermined extraction point, where Mitchell's team was waiting with vehicles capable of fighting their way through Taliban checkpoints if necessary. The American Special Forces soldiers greeted her with expressions of disbelief and respect that reflected their amazement at what she had accomplished during the past few hours. "How the hell did you pull that off?" Mitchell asked as their convoy began moving toward coalition-controlled territory. Maria smiled while examining the documents she had taken from Ramon's office. "They underestimated me. People always underestimate what a small woman can accomplish when she sets her mind to something." The intelligence package she had secured contained detailed information about terrorist networks operating throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan, including planned attacks that could now be prevented and leadership structures that coalition forces could target in follow-up operations. Ramon's elimination would disrupt terrorist operations throughout the region, while demonstrating that even the most protected enemy leaders were vulnerable to determined special operations personnel. Captain Mitchell included a detailed account of Maria's performance in his official report, emphasizing her tactical brilliance, operational courage, and extraordinary contribution to coalition counterterrorism efforts. The report recommended her for the highest decorations available to foreign military personnel serving alongside American forces, though many details of her operation would remain classified to protect ongoing intelligence operations in the region. Maria returned to the Philippines 3 months later, her mission in Afghanistan having established her reputation as one of the most capable special operations soldiers of her generation. The quiet woman from a small fishing village had proven that courage and competence matter more than size or appearance when facing the most dangerous challenges in modern warfare. Her success in eliminating Rahman and dismantling his network saved countless lives while advancing the broader mission of establishing peace and security in one of the world's most troubled regions. But perhaps more importantly, Maria's story demonstrated that extraordinary people can emerge from the most ordinary circumstances when they refuse to accept the limitations that others try to impose on their dreams and ambitions. Years later, when military historians studied the counterterrorism operations that helped stabilize Afghanistan during that crucial period, Maria's infiltration and elimination of Rahman's network would be recognized as a masterpiece of special operations planning and execution. Her ability to turn apparent disadvantages into tactical advantages revolutionized thinking about personnel selection and mission planning for sensitive operations in complex environments. The small woman who grew up mending fishing nets and climbing trees had become a legend within the Special Forces community, proof that the most dangerous opponents are often those who are consistently underestimated by their enemies. Maria Santos had shattered every assumption about limitations and capabilities, demonstrating that true warriors are defined by character and determination rather than physical appearance or social expectations. Her story continues to inspire Special Forces personnel around the world who face seemingly impossible missions in hostile environments where success depends on skill, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for causes greater than personal safety. Maria proved that heroes come in all sizes and from all backgrounds, united only by their refusal to accept defeat when the stakes matter most.